Hello and welcome to our webinar session for today. Today's topic, we are going to be looking at the operation and maintenance of Tauro installations. And joining me for today's webinar is my colleague, Mohammed Sidat, our technical sales advisor based in Johannesburg, South Africa, taking care of the market in the Southern African region. And myself, David Mwangi, I'm the technical sales advisor taking care of the East African region. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. Our agenda for today, we are going to basically look at the process of operation and maintenance of the Tauro inverter series. And we are going to start with giving you an overview of the Fronius Tauro. Then we go into the Fronius Tauro configuration. We look at examples of Tauro layouts and then how the Tauro does data communication. After that, we go into monitoring analysis, Tauro service process, and we finish off by giving you some additional details depending on what is available for this and other products. So let's get started and look at the Tauro overview. And the Tauro overview, of course, most of us are already familiar or have heard about the Fronius Tauro, is what we are referring as the new Fronius commercial inverter. It's a hard shell with a smart core. And we can talk about basically what this hard shell means and what this smart core is all about. But in a nutshell, this will be a very robust commercial inverter that can operate in very harsh conditions and be able to give you optimal power outputs regardless of the operating conditions. In terms of availability, the Fronius Tauro is going to come in two key variants. One is what we are referring as the Tauro Eco. In the Tauro Eco power variant, we are also going to have two power classes. One power class is going to be at 50 kilowatts and the next power class at 100 kilowatts. Both of these power classes will have one MPPT inbuilt into the inverter with an operating voltage range at MPP of around 580 to 930 volts. Maximum DC voltage connectable to the inverter will be limited to 1000 volts. In terms of weight, we can see that it's a bit bulkier than the SNAPINVERTER series. The 50 kilowatt version will be at 72 kilograms and the 100 kilowatt version will come in at 101 kgs. The next variant of the Tauro inverter is what we call the Tauro without the echo. The other before was the Tauro with an echo after it. So this is the inverter that will be available at only 50 kilowatt power class. And this will have 3 MPPTs inbuilt into the inverter. In terms of the operating max MPP voltage, we are looking at a slightly wider voltage of starting from 480 to 870 volts. But the maximum DC voltage is still limited to 1000 volts DC. In terms of weight, it's pretty similar to the 50 kilowatt Echo at 74 kgs. So to look at some of the key attributes of the Fronius Tauro commercial inverter, we are talking about a product that has a very reliable design. So we have used durable materials and electronics in this inverter. We're also talking about a compact product design that enables a lot of onboard features, the power stage system or the power stage concept to be used in this inverter. And also the design itself is quite spacious. So if you open up the front cover of the inverter, you're going to see that there are quite a number of possibilities with the remaining space that is left in the inverter that you can do for quite a number of things that will be quite useful for your installation. And then of course, another key attribute would be in terms of the design itself, the double wall concept. So the inverter will have the front cover in a double wall kind of concept so that you have what you can see at the front and then behind it you have the area where the circulation of air is happening, but still you're not exposing the electronics. So that gives the inverter a very robust design, whereby you can even operate at a direct sunlight or sun heat up to upwards of 50 degrees C, and the inverter is going to be able to give you maximum power output. And therefore, the conclusion that we can draw from these key attributes of the Fronius Tauro inverter is the fact that we are looking or talking about an inverter that is going to give you very good performance, because it's a strong device in this sense. Also, we can talk about what is going to make the Fronius Tauro so special for your commercial installations, and we can highlight a few things here. And one of the things that I've already mentioned is the fact that the inverter, the Tauro inverter, is extremely robust and can be used for unprotected outdoor installations. We can talk about the ease of installation. If you look at the concept, even the AC daisy chaining, that is the next special thing about the inverter, that makes your installation process quite straightforward and simple. We're also talking about cost reduction due to the flexibility of the design that you can have with the Fronius Tauro. Then, of course, system monitoring. So the Fronius Tauro has on board already the pilot integrated, and therefore this is going to allow you to send data to SolarWeb for monitoring. So each of the Tauro inverter will come fully fitted with the pilot. And then, of course, due to the power stage concept that I have also mentioned, we are looking at an inverter that is going to allow you easy and rapid service, depending on when that is required. Let's now talk about the Tauro configuration. When it comes to Tauro configuration, we have a few helps or assistance that you can get from Fronius. And one of the things that you can use for your Tauro configuration, once you have decided that you want to use a Fronius Tauro in your project, and you want to be sure that you're choosing the right Tauro inverter, then we have a configuration tool that we refer to as the Fronius Tauro configurator. And this is available by following this link that is provided here. So once you follow this link, I can give you a very brief demonstration of the same. You are basically going to see how this is done. So let's see how long this takes to connect, and hopefully give you just a basic overview of the Tauro configurator. So once you click on the link, you open this web area, and you can basically start by designing your system, choosing whether you're going to go for a centralized or decentralized kind of design. We are going to look into these two variations also of topologies later. But this configurator, therefore, is going to allow you to choose right from the start which variation of the Tauro are you going to choose to be using. So all the things that you need to do, the inverter type, the fuses, the surge protectors, AC connection area, as well as the AC disconnection area, are all going to be selected within the Fronius configurator, Tauro configurator. And the other thing that is quite unique about the Tauro configurator is the fact that for every process, as you go along with the selection criteria, and you're not very sure about what each of the sections means, then you get the I tab where you can click and be able to get a better description of what that particular section means. So for instance, when you look at the centralized area, we are saying that in a centralized system design, the module strings are all connected in a string combiner box. So, and then they are connected to the inverter using one DC combiner bus. So the inverters in this case would be, as we can see in this photo, centrally placed, and therefore there's a shorter distance of cable running from the inverters to the AC distribution board. So very useful insights also that you can get directly within the configurator itself. The next section that can give you a lot of, that comes in very handy when you are designing your Tauro system will be the Fronius Solar Configurator. And this is the standard configuration or sizing tool is a string design tool for all Fronius inverters. So not only for the Tauro in this case, but the Tauro configurator is only for the Tauro because it allows you to choose components and features that are only possible with the Fronius Tauro. But with the Solar Configurator, Then here you can design the exact string lengths that you desire to use with your Fronius Tauro inverter. And therefore, here you can also achieve optimal string design for your commercial systems. So both of these tools are actually free of charge, and you can use them freely as you want to double check on your designs. So when you're using also other third-party complete design softwares, we have these dedicated softwares at Fronius whereby you can also double check exactly how your design is fitting into the inverter that you have chosen to use. Let's go ahead and look at the Tauro layout. In terms of the Tauro versions, these are the ones that are going to determine the kind of layout that you're going to have. So we have two variations, as I had already mentioned, and the two key variations here, we are talking about the Tauro PRECOMBINED and the direct version. However, in terms of the Tauro inverters themselves, we are talking about these two variations for commercial installations. In the Eco class for the 50 kilowatt and 100 kilowatt, we can see that we also have a bit of variations here. The 50 kilowatt inverter will have one power stack, but the 100 kilowatt inverter will have two power stacks. So you get a bit of an advantage with the 100 kilowatt inverter, because this would allow you, for instance, if one power stack becomes faulty, to take it out and leave the other half of the inverter at 50 kilowatts operating. But of course, that depends on how exactly or how many inverters therefore you have used in your system. So what is the difference between the pre-combined and the direct variations? So the P, therefore, standing for pre-combined, is used for central topologies. And in a central topology, as you have mentioned, when looking at the the Tauro configurator, we are talking about a design whereby all your inverters are centrally placed. And therefore, from the solar array area, you have DC combiner boxes where the DC power is connected to the inverter using long distance cables for DC connection. And then there's a shorter distance running from the inverter for the AC connection to the distribution panel. When talking about the D version or the Tauro inverters, we are talking about an inverter variation that will allow you to connect the module strings or the array strings directly to the inverter. And therefore, as you can see in this photo, the AC cabling will run a much longer distance from the inverter to the DC connection area, AC connection area, or the distribution board for that matter. So let's now look at specific layout examples that you can use for the Tauro. And in this example, we are looking at a 1 megawatt PV installation, which is a free field. And the other thing that can also guide us is the fact that we are using the D version of the inverter or the decentralized version. And therefore, in this case, we are connecting the strings directly to the inverter. And as we can see here, the advantage of the D version, one of them will be the fact that we do not require DC combiner boxes. And therefore, that is a cost that can already be cut out of your CapEx for the system. This system will also give you another advantage that it has ease of planning, so it's a standard design. And in future, string monitoring will be possible directly in SolarWeb for this kind of installation whereby you're using the D variant of the Tauro. Another variation would be whereby we are using the Tauro D version as well. So this was a bit different. So you can see that the connection of all the AC cables is done separately from the distribution panel to each of the inverters directly. So this is another variation that we should note about the Tauro inverter, because the other variation using the direct version of the Tauro is whereby we are now talking about connection of the AC side using AC daisy chaining, so which is another special attribute of the Tauro inverters. So as you can see here, we have power coming from the distribution board for the main AC section, and the two first inverters are connected through the same AC connection cables. And therefore, we can connect up to 200 kilowatts of Tauro inverters. So therefore means that if you're using 50 kilowatt inverters, Tauro Eco, you can connect up to 4 of them in a daisy chain connection. But if you're using the 100 kilowatt as in this example, you're able to daisy chain 2 inverters to make blocks of 200 kilowatt AC for daisy chaining. So on top of the daisy chaining, which of course allows you to cut on the cost of the AC cabling, because it's a direct version here still, you do not require DC combiner boxes. And therefore, if you look at because of the shorter AC cables, you have lower cable costs. And then also in terms of laying the cables, you have less installation of effort. And therefore, this also is another consideration that you give the Tauro commercial inverter in terms of the capex and all the saving points that you can achieve by designing your systems around the Fronius Tauro. Another variation we can talk about is when you're using the P variant of the Tauro inverter. In this example, we are looking at a free field installation, which is about 2 megawatts. And the major difference here we can see is the fact that all the inverters are placed near each other, and therefore this is a central positioning of the inverters. And therefore, the DC connection area of the inverters, instead of connecting the strings directly to the inverter, is already pre-combined. And therefore, it means that, as we can see, we have DC combiner boxes, as can be shown in these yellow boxes. So all the DC and the plus and minus of the array is collected first in the DC combiner box. And this therefore is done, the connection is done further to the inverters using longer cables. So one of the advantages we might have here is because we are using long DC cables, we have a lower cable cost for DC cables, and also because the DC voltage will be quite high, even higher than what we can talk about on the AC side of the inverter. We are going to have less power source losses compared to when you're using a long AC cable. As I had mentioned, the Tauro can be connected with upwards of 800 volts on the DC side. In terms of access to the inverters, because all the inverters are placed in the same sort of location or centrally placed, then you have ease of access to all the inverters, and therefore the installation and commissioning process as well as service are a lot easier than when you have all the inverters scattered all over the field. So you can do a very quick monitoring and service of all the inverters when they are centrally placed. But of course, the choice of the layout then depends on the exact type of environment you're operating in, and which therefore variation of the topology is going to best fit what you desire. Let's proceed and look at the Fronius Tauro DATCOM, or in longer, the data communication of the Fronius Tauro. As I had mentioned before, the Tauro inverters are all fitted as standard with a pilot. So each Tauro inverter is already a master on its own. So the pilot is, of course, the data logger, the web server, and the Wi-Fi LAN interface of the Fronius Tauro. And it's going to allow you to visualize the production data of the Fronius Tauro directly in SolarWeb. And of course, SolarWeb can also be downloaded as a phone app, and therefore you can do all your monitoring using the phone app, the phone. So if you take, for instance, this Tauro inverter and open it up, what you're going to see is this section where the pilot is installed within the Tauro, and therefore this, as I've mentioned, is going to come as standard. So each of the Tauro inverters is going to be its own master, which is a bit different compared to when you are talking about the Snap inverter series. The pilot, of course, has all the common interfaces that we talk about. If you compare it to the Fronius data manager, the only key difference here is the fact that it will have 2 Modbus channels or interfaces. The data manager only has one, and the pilot is going to have an extra channel for RS485 connection. And then it also allows the wired shutdown functionality of the inverter if this is required, maybe because of local regulations. If you need to disable the inverter production if there is an emergency on the roof or something like that, then the inverter fitted with the pilot has this wired shutdown functionality possible. And of course, just like the Fronius data manager, the Fronius pilot is also going to be capable of digital inputs and outputs. In terms of the comparison now, that just to give you a bit of a difference between how this is going to look like between the Fronius Snap Inverter series and the Tauro, As we already know, when you're talking about a system that has more than 2 inverters, Fronius snap inverters, then the connection between inverters is what we refer to as the solar net ring, and this is possible using the in and out RJ45 connections of the inverters. Then, of course, at the very end of the ring, then there are termination plugs that are used to mark that this is the end or the beginning of the loop, the communication loop. In this case, the Fronius snap inverters have what we refer to as inverter-to-inverter communication. But in contrast, we are going to have a different scenario when talking about the Fronius Tauro inverters. Because the Fronius Tauro inverters at the moment do not have inverter-to-inverter communication. And therefore, the DATCOM arrangement is going to be a bit different. As we can see in this illustration, we have a LAN switch that is now connecting all the inverters to an internet router or a plant controller if one is required, if you have more than one inverter in your system. So all the inverters will have cabled connection or Ethernet cable connection between the switch and the router. And then from there, the plant controller is going to also connect to the monitoring platform. But each of these Tauros in the system already, as mentioned, because they have the pilot integrated as standard, can already send data directly on their own to Fronius SolarWeb. So what are the key differences, therefore, with this comparison between the DATCOM communication of the Tauro and the snap inverter? So the communication unit, which is the pilot, is already integrated as standard for the Gen 20. But if you look at the snap inverter, you have the choice of buying the inverter without the data communication unit. And therefore, these are the inverters that we refer to as the light versions. And then you have the initial commissioning of the Tauro using LAN or Wi-Fi. And then for the snap inverter, you can do device configuration even without the data manager device for light devices. So every device is online, as I already mentioned, for the Tauro series. But when you desire to have the snap inverters come online, then you would at least require one inverter in the system to have the data manager integrated, or at least use the data manager box as an external data communication module. So then the data communication for the Tauro can be done using very reliable and robust Ethernet technology. But for the snap inverter, you have mostly Wi-Fi connection that is used for a lot of installations. So now let's look at some DATCOM examples and how the pilot in the Tauros is going to achieve data communication. So in this example, we are talking about inverters that are all arranged in one direction. And therefore, just to give you an example of how the LAN switches are going to be positioned. So this is a decentral design, and we can see that the inverters are about 120 meters away, the farthest one, from the switchboard or the transformer. And therefore, because of the distance, as we know, there is a max distance that you have to bear in mind when you're using the Ethernet connection using LAN, is that after 100 meters, then your signal will start to sort of degrade. And therefore, in this arrangement, we have at least 2 LAN switches. So one is used basically to amplify the signal after about 60 meters or thereabout, and then the remaining distance also to the next switch, and then onwards to the inverter, to the internet through the router and the plant controller. So something else I should mention here is the fact that when you're using more than one Tauro inverter and you want to, for instance, for the African market, do export limitation, then you're not going to be able to achieve that using the smart meter, as is the case for installations with the snap inverter series. But for the Tauros, you're going to require maybe a third-party plant controller for you to be able to do feed export limitation for these Tauro inverters. Another positioning in terms of DATCOM and the LAN switches that are used in Tauro installations would be whereby the inverters are positioned irregularly in the field, and therefore bearing in mind also the distance that we have mentioned for before the signal starts to degrade in a LAN connection. We have positioned here several LAN switches. As we can see here, we have 3 of them. So, and this is to make sure that the communication from each of the inverter or the farthest inverter to the router is happening as smoothly as possible, and also the control from the plant controller, because this is also happening through the LAN connection, is happening as smoothly as possible. And then the last kind of example that I can show you for the positioning of the LAN switches is when you have a central design. And in a central design, therefore, it does make things a little bit easy because all the inverters are near to each other. And therefore, in this case, you might just require one LAN switch. So therefore, please bear in mind that when you're designing your systems, the distance from one inverter to the next will become very, very important for you to decide if you require additional LAN switches for your installation, depending, of course, therefore, on how many Tauro inverters you have. But for a centralized design, you can see that we require only one LAN switch, and therefore the cabling also is going to be a bit simple as far as laying the LAN cables are concerned. So therefore, that brings me to the end of the first section, and I'll now be handing over to my colleague, Mohammed, who will be doing the presentation for the remaining bit of it. So Mohammed, if you can take it over from here, please.
Thank you, David. Okay, we'll now have a look at the solar.web. I'm going to take you for a quick live tour. As this webinar is focused on operation and maintenance, I thought it's a good idea just to show the attendees today of what a Tauro system kind of looks like on SolarWeb. So I'm just going to open up a live system that we have installed in the field. So this here is currently a live system we have. Okay, it's about I think it's a 1.1 or 1.2 megawatt system, somewhere around there. Here we can see what the generator or inverter output is currently. And if you look at the amount of devices over here, here we can see all the inverters listed. And as my colleague David said earlier on, each Tauro inverter has a communication card, which is called a pilot card. And this is why you can see each pilot card uniquely identified over here, which obviously corresponds to the applicable inverter. Okay, we're not going to focus too much time on what you can do on SolarWeb because this webinar is not really based on that, but just to show you what data can sort of look like. So I've selected inverter number 1 and 2. So here we have 12 inverters in total. I've just selected the first 2 inverters, and I basically want to know what's happening on the first MPPT tracker in order to pick up if there's any errors in the system. Maybe my panels are dirty, or maybe there's a broken panel, or whatever the case may be. This is usually a good way to spot such errors. So what I've done is just selected your current on your MPPT1 and your voltage on the MPPT1, and you just press OK, and you can then get some data generated for you. Okay, it will take some time to load. Okay, here we can see at around, let's say 5 o'clock or so for sunrise. The site is located in Austria, so I think since it is summer over there, it's the sun does tend to rise quite early. Okay, so here we can see our PV production started to kick in, going up and up and up, and midday is around now, so it's sort of reaching almost its peak production for the day, so to speak. But here we can see the discrepancy in values between the current on MPPT1 for inverter 1 and 2. So maybe there could be, maybe inverter 1, the panels on inverter 1 are pointing in a different direction to the panels on inverter 2, as an example. But yeah, I mean, what you can do is you can have a look at a whole host of data. And what we will be adding to the system in the future, so maybe in a year or 2 from now, is that we will also be bringing about string monitoring, where you can actually monitor what's happening on each and every string in terms of the current and voltage levels. Okay, going back to the webinar. I'll now take you through the second part of the presentation, which is focusing on the service process, which kind of falls under the maintenance of a Tauro inverter. So what do you do as an installer or EPC if there is, something wrong with the Tauro inverter. Usually it's the end customer who will detect it, or maybe your operation and maintenance team will detect it. And you will usually, contact your installer. Maybe you are the installer yourself. If that's the case, you then have two avenues you can get help from. You can either contact our Fronius tech support directly, or if you are an installer, it's better just to go through your FSP Plus, which is your distributor that you purchased the Fronius inverter from. If you are an EPC that has, for example, bought directly from Fronius, then it would obviously make more sense for you to go through Fronius technical support. Okay. Once you've used the applicable avenue, you then deduce what your error is. The case could be that you might need to order an exchange inverter, or maybe you need to replace particular components. You then need to go ahead with that, do the replacements on site. Please note, you can only do the repairs on site if you are an authorized Fronius system partner. If you're not a Fronius system partner, then unfortunately you do have to look for a Fronius system partner who can do that for you, or you need to contact your FSP Plus, who can do the repairs and replacements for you. Just having a look at our FSP Plus partners for the region, this obviously is very important in the servicing and maintenance of a Tauro installation. As I said earlier on, if you're an installer, you will most likely be purchasing your Fronius products from a distributor. And these are all our distributors for Sub-Saharan Africa. They keep all replacement parts in stock. And they also offer you your first point of technical support, okay, if there's any issues with the product. So for example, in South Africa, it's Innomatic Solar and IBC Solar. In Zimbabwe, One Stop Solar. In Namibia, Radio Electronics. In Ghana, Tino Solutions. In Kenya, CAT, Green Spark, and Light Energy. In Nigeria, Components. In Mali, Sonikara, and in Madagascar, Mother Green Power. So as you can see, we do have quite a wide footprint across Sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to support and distribution. Just having a closer look at your inverter exchange steps. So as I said earlier on, if you are a EPC company and you've purchased directly from Fronius, then you're going to need to contact the Fronius tech support line directly. You can do this with the SOS online tool, or you can even call our hotline, or send us an email. However, if you are an installer and you've purchased from a distributor that I showed you on the previous page, then you need to contact your FSP Plus for technical support. Okay, that is very important. Please note that your technical sales advisors are not your point of contact for technical support. Okay, it will be your FSP Plus or your Fronius tech support hotline. The second step is that you need to give the inverter serial number and state code to your FSP Plus. Okay, troubleshooting will be done. The FSP Plus will then dispatch the replacement parts if needed. You can then exchange the faulty components or the inverter on site. There's no need to send the inverter back to the distributor or back to Fronius. You only send the defective components back to your distributor or back to Fronius. Okay, let's have a look at the spare parts for the Tauro. So as my colleague David showed you earlier on, if you have a 100 kilowatt Tauro, you will have two power stacks. Okay, basically the power stack is where your power conversion between DC and AC occurs. If you have a 50 kilowatt Tauro, you'll only have one power stack. Okay, so this is how the power stack looks, and as you can see, the power stack kind of hinges in the inverter. So if one power stack, for example, had to become faulty for some reason, it's very easy to replace this power stack with another power stack. It's just removing it from the inverter and placing the new power stack in. You can also, replace the pilot card, which is the communication card. You can also replace the control board. So as my colleague David said earlier on, each and every Tauro inverter has a pilot card and a power stack and a control board. Okay, your fuse boards, be careful, only the Fronius direct Tauros have fuse boards. The pre-combined versions don't have fuse boards, so just take note of that. Your fans can also be replaced. And also the other parts like covers, enclosures, screws, etc. For the service process, the FSP Plus basically stocks all spare parts locally. Okay. You need to contact them. You need to obviously give them the serial number, as I said earlier on. You need to clarify the error. You then need to order the exchange components, accomplish the exchange, and return the defective component to the FSP Plus. So what I've showed you here on the right is how the power stack looks inside the actual inverter. So here we can see if you remove it, we have it here on the bottom, and you just place a new one in and attach the applicable cable. So again, the repair process on site is very quick and easy, but as I said earlier on, please make sure that you get this done by authorized Fronius system partner. If you'd like some more helpful documentation on the replacement and repair process, we have all this available on our website. Just search for those applicable documents. Okay, when it comes to replacing a defective inverter, please do note that your control board and your pilots, it's very important to do the correct licensing, which I will talk about now. So what will happen if you need to replace, for example, the control board or the pilot board in the Tauro inverter? We do the replacement of one of these two boards. Once the inverter is connected again to the internet, it will automatically download the config files from SolarWeb and then update itself to the new boards. With the license exchange, when is a license exchange necessary? As I showed you earlier on, when you do a control board exchange or when you do a pilot exchange. Okay, so if you change the power stack, you don't need to do licensing. The pilot registers what type of exchange has been initiated and guides the user through the exchange process. You get two license exchange processes possible. You get the online exchange, and this the user has to bring the device online. The exchange of the license will be handled automatically. So basically what I showed you in the previous slide. Then you get the offline exchange, where the user has to download the so-called service file and then uploads it to the web user interface of the Tauro, and then you get the new license file to download, and yeah, the Tauro is then up to date with the new license. For further information, you're welcome to look at our YouTube channel for Sub-Saharan Africa. You're also welcome to go to our homepage where you can find all our documents and installation manuals. And if you'd like to contact the applicable Fronius contact number, please do find them all on your screen. That's it for today's webinar. Have a good weekend, and we shall see you in, well, we won't have a webinar next week, but the week after. So goodbye and have a good day.